The banking dynasties. How America's elite families got rich funding. Both world wars, Morgan, Rockefeller, Warburg, Rothschild, names you recognize. What you don't know, they made billions financing both sides of two world wars. Millions dead, economies destroyed, democracy overthrown, and these families got richer than kings. Then they spent a century making sure you'd never connect the dots. Until now. J.P. Morgan Jr., the most powerful banker in America during World War I. His bank made $30 million in commissions. That's $850 million today, from one war. And he did it again in World War II. The Rockefellers sold oil to Nazi Germany while American soldiers died fighting them. Standard oil tankers flying swastika flags. The Warburgs, one brother financing Germany, another financing America. Same family, both sides guaranteed profit. And the Rothschilds, they've been doing this since Napoleon. 5 brothers, 5 countries, all of them funding wars, all of them getting rich no matter who won. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented financial history. Congressional investigations, banking records, corporate documents, declassified files. The evidence exists, but nobody teaches it because these families still run the financial system. Their banks still exist. J.P. Morgan Chase, over $4 trillion in assets. Their descendants still control enormous wealth. And they've made sure this story stays buried. But here's the thing about financial records. They don't lie. The numbers are there. The transactions happened. And what they reveal is that the deadliest conflicts in human history, wars that killed over 100 million people combined, were profit opportunities for America's banking elite. They didn't just benefit from war. They enabled it. They financed it. They prolonged it. And they made sure it happened again. Because war is the most profitable business in human history. And these families perfected the business model. Loan money to governments, sell weapons to armies, finance reconstruction after the destruction, and own the debt forever. It's the ultimate monopoly you can't lose. Governments always pay their war debts, and if they don't, you get to seize their assets, control their resources, own their infrastructure. This is how banking dynasties are built. Not through innovation or entrepreneurship, through war. And the families who mastered this playbook in the 20th century are still operating today, still financing conflicts, still profiting from chaos, still controlling the money supply that makes it all possible. This is the story they don't want you to know. How America's banking elite funded both world wars, made fortunes from mass death, and built a financial empire that controls the global economy today. Let's start with the biggest name, Morgan J.P. Morgan died in 1913, right before World War I started. Perfect timing. Because what happened next would have made even him uncomfortable. His son, J.P. Morgan Jr., took over the bank. And when war broke out in Europe in 1914, he saw the opportunity of a lifetime. Britain and France needed money, massive amounts, to buy weapons, ammunition, food, supplies. They needed loans. But European banks were devastated. So they came to America, to J.P. Morgan Jr., and Morgan became the exclusive purchasing agent for the British and French governments in America. Every single purchase Britain or France made in America went through J.P. Morgan & Co. Every weapon, every bullet, every can of food. Morgan's bank took a commission on everything, 0.5% here, 1% there. It adds up fast when you're handling $3 billion in purchases. That's $85 billion in today's money. Morgan's commission, $30 million, $850 million today. From being a middleman in a war. But it gets worse. Morgan didn't just facilitate purchases, he gave massive loans to Britain and France, $500 million in 1915. That's $15 billion today. The terms were simple, high interest, and Britain and France had to spend the money buying American goods, specifically, goods from companies Morgan had investments in. DuPont, making explosives, U.S. Steel, making weapons. Morgan made money on the loan, made money on the interest, and made money when the borrowed money was spent buying products from companies he owned. It's the perfect racket. And here's the kicker. By 1917, Morgan's bank had loaned so much money to Britain and France that if they lost the war, Morgan would lose everything. The loans wouldn't be repaid, so Morgan needed the Allies to win. And in 1917, when it looked like Germany might win, Morgan started pushing for America to enter the war. He had newspapers, he had politicians, he had influence. And in April 1917, America joined World War I. Some historians argue Morgan's financial interest in an Allied victory was a major factor in pushing America into the war. We sent American soldiers to die, and one of the reasons was to protect J.P. Morgan's loans. Over 116,000 American soldiers died in World War I. And J.P. Morgan and Cousin made a fortune. But Morgan wasn't alone. The Rockefellers, the richest family in America. John D. Rockefeller Sr. built Standard Oil into a monopoly. By World War I, his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., was running the empire. And Standard Oil was essential to modern warfare. Tanks, planes, ships, trucks, everything ran on oil. Whoever controlled oil controlled the war, and the Rockefellers controlled American oil. During World War I, Standard Oil sold fuel to the U.S. military, to Britain, to France. Massive profits. But here's what they don't tell you. Standard Oil also had business relationships with German chemical companies. IG Farben, the massive German conglomerate that made explosives, poison gas, synthetic fuel. Standard Oil had joint ventures with IG Farben. They shared patents, technology, resources, even during the war, and it continued into World War II. In the 1930s, Standard Oil was selling oil to Nazi Germany. They had arrangements to provide tetraethyl lead, a critical additive for aviation fuel. Without it, the Luftwaffe couldn't fly. Standard Oil knew they were supplying the Nazi war machine. They did it anyway. Profit was profit. In 1942, after America entered World War II, the U.S. government investigated Standard Oil for trading with the enemy. Thurman Arnold, Assistant Attorney General, said Standard Oil had committed treason. But nothing happened. No one was prosecuted. The Rockefellers were too powerful. And here's the evidence. Standard Oil tankers were found fueling German U-boats in South America during the war. Congressional hearings documented it. Senator Harry Truman, before he became president, led an investigation. He found that American corporations, including Standard Oil, were supplying Nazi Germany even after Pearl Harbor. The Rockefellers made money selling oil to America and selling technology to Germany. Both sides. Guaranteed profit. Just like Morgan. Then there's the Warburg family. This one's almost unbelievable, but it's documented. The Warburgs were one of the most powerful banking families in the world, German Jews who built a banking empire across Europe and America. In 1914, when World War I started, the family split. Paul Warburg stayed in America. He was on the board of the Federal Reserve, which he helped create in 1913. He was one of the most influential bankers in America. His brother, Max Warburg, stayed in Germany. He was the head of the Warburg Bank in Hamburg and a financial advisor to the German government. So during World War I, Paul Warburg was helping finance the American and Allied war effort, and Max Warburg was helping finance the German war effort. Same family, both sides. They stayed in contact throughout the war. Letters exist in archives. They were coordinating, making sure both sides had funding. Because if both sides were funded, the war would last longer. More loans, more interest, more profit, and it happened again in World War II. Max Warburg initially stayed in Germany, even as the Nazis rose to power. He helped arrange financing for German rearmament in the 1930s. Meanwhile, his relatives in America, including James Warburg, were connected to U.S. financial and government institutions. Eventually, Max fled Germany in 1938, but by then, the damage was done. The Warburg banks had helped finance both sides of two world wars, and the family made billions. But the most shadowy player? The Rothschilds. This family has been financing wars for over 200 years, and they perfected the model. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the founder, had 5 sons. He sent them to 5 different European capitals: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. Each son opened a bank, and the Rothschild banks became the go-to financiers for European governments. During the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s, the Rothschilds financed both Britain and France. Nathan Rothschild in London funded the British war effort. James Rothschild in Paris dealt with the French. The family made a fortune. And they pioneered a strategy. Always finance both sides. That way you can't lose. Whoever wins the war still owes you money. By World War I, the Rothschild banks were deeply embedded in European finance. They arranged loans for Britain, France, Russia. They had connections in Germany and Austria-Hungary. Publicly, the Rothschilds supported the Allies, but privately, their banks facilitated capital flows that benefited all parties. It's hard to trace because the Rothschilds are obsessively private. Their banks are not publicly traded. Their records are sealed. But financial historians have documented their involvement, and in World War II, it continued. The Rothschilds had to be more careful because of Nazi anti-Semitism. The Nazis seized Rothschild assets in Austria and France, but the family's banks in London and Switzerland continued operating. And after the war, they were right back in the game, financing reconstruction, making loans, profiting from the aftermath. Here's the pattern. These families don't care who wins. They care that wars happen, because wars require massive loans, and governments always repay war debts, always, even if it takes 50 years. The bonds get paid, the interest accumulates, and the banks get richer. Let's talk about how this actually worked, the mechanics, because understanding the system shows you how it still operates today. When a country goes to war, it needs money immediately, massive amounts, to mobilize armies, build weapons, feed soldiers. But governments don't have that cash on hand, so they borrow. They issue bonds, war bonds, and banks buy those bonds or arrange for investors to buy them. The bonds pay interest, usually high interest because war is risky. If the government loses, the bonds are worthless. But here's the trick the banking families figured out. If you finance both sides, you can't lose. One side will win, and the winner pays their bonds. So you make money no matter what. During World War I, J.P. Morgan bought British and French war bonds, billions of dollars worth. He also arranged for American investors to buy them. Morgan took a cut of every transaction. And when the war ended, Britain and France paid their bonds. With interest, Morgan made a fortune, but Britain and France were broke. So, how did they pay? They demanded reparations from Germany. The Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to pay $33 billion in reparations. That's $530 billion today. Germany couldn't pay that. So what happened? American banks, including J.P. Morgan, loaned money to Germany so Germany could pay reparations to Britain and France. And Britain and France used those reparations to pay back their loans to American banks. It's a circle. The banks loaned money to everyone, collected interest from everyone, and made sure the debt cycle never ended. This is called the Dawes Plan, implemented in 1924. Charles Dawes, an American banker, won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. But it wasn't about peace. It was about making sure the banks got paid. American banks loaned Germany $800 million in the 1920s. Germany used that money to pay reparations. Britain and France used the reparations to pay American banks, and American banks made interest on all of it. It's the most brilliant scam in financial history. Create the debt, finance the repayment of the debt, and collect interest on both sides. And it directly enabled World War II, because the reparations bankrupted Germany. Hyperinflation, economic collapse, political chaos. And out of that chaos came Adolf Hitler. He rose to power by promising to restore Germany's economy and reject the Versailles Treaty. And when he took power, he needed money to rebuild the German military. Guess who loaned it to him? American banks and corporations. General Motors, Ford, IBM, Standard Oil, Chase Bank. All of them did business with Nazi Germany in the 1930s. They built factories, sold technology, provided financing. Chase Bank, which was connected to the Rockefeller family, handled accounts for German businesses and even some Nazi officials. IBM provided the punch card systems that the Nazis used to track populations, including Jews sent to concentration camps. Edwin Black wrote a whole book about it. IBM and the Holocaust. The evidence is undeniable. Ford Motor Company built trucks for the Nazi military. Henry Ford was a notorious anti-Semite. Hitler admired him. Ford received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle from the Nazi government in 1938, And Ford's factories in Germany kept producing military vehicles throughout the war, even while American soldiers were fighting Germans. After the war, Ford's German factories claimed they were under Nazi control and couldn't refuse, but they made massive profits. And General Motors? Their subsidiary, Opel, was the largest truck manufacturer in Germany. Those trucks carried German troops across Europe. GM claimed they lost control of Opel when the war started, but financial records show GM executives were coordinating with their German operations well into the war. And after the war, GM sued the US government for bombing their factories in Germany, and won, got $33 million in compensation. American taxpayers paid GM for damage to factories that built Nazi trucks. The hypocrisy is staggering. These corporations were making profits from both sides, selling to the American military, selling to the Nazi military, and the banking families behind these corporations, the Morgans, Rockefellers, and others, were financing it all. War is business, and business was booming. But here's what makes it even darker. Some of these families actively wanted wars to continue, because the longer the war, the more money they made. There's evidence that J.P. Morgan and Co. lobbied against early peace negotiations in World War I. Why? Because if the war ended quickly, the loans wouldn't be as profitable. In World War II, American banks continued lending to companies doing business with Nazi Germany until 1942, a full year after Pearl Harbor. Why? Because profit. The Treasury Department eventually cracked down, but by then the money had been made, and no one was ever held accountable. No banker went to jail, no Rockefeller, no Morgan, no Warburg faced consequences, because they owned the politicians. They funded the campaigns. They controlled the narrative. After World War II, you'd think there would be a reckoning. Trials, investigations, accountability. There were trials for Nazi war criminals, Nuremberg. Justice was served, supposedly. But what about the American bankers and industrialists who funded the Nazi war machine? Nothing. There was a plan. The US government considered prosecuting American executives who traded with Nazi Germany. But it never happened. Why? Because these men were too powerful, too connected. They knew senators, congressmen, presidents. And they had leverage. After the war, America needed to rebuild Europe. The Marshall Plan, $13 billion in aid. That's $173 billion today. And guess who administered those loans? The same banks that profited from the war. J.P. Morgan, Chase, Rockefeller-connected banks. They financed the reconstruction, made billions more. The families that enabled the wars got even richer rebuilding what the wars destroyed. It's the perfect business model. Finance the destruction, finance the reconstruction, own the debt forever. And this system is still operating today. J.P. Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in America. Direct descendant of J.P. Morgan & Co., over $4 trillion in assets. They finance governments, armies, defense contractors. Every major military conflict in the last 50 years, there's been Wall Street money behind it. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. The banks that financed World War I and World War II are still financing wars today. The names changed slightly, but the families behind them are the same. The Morgans, the Rockefellers, they're still there, still powerful, still profiting. Look at the defense industry, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. These companies make billions from military contracts. And who finances them? Wall Street banks. Who are the major shareholders? Investment firms connected to the old banking families. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. These firms manage trillions of dollars, and they own significant shares in every major defense contractor. And who are the largest investors in BlackRock and Vanguard? The descendants of the banking dynasties. The system never ended. It evolved. The Rockefeller family still controls enormous wealth through trusts, foundations, and investments. The Rockefeller Foundation has $5 billion in assets. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, another billion. That money came from oil profits made selling to both sides of 2 world wars. And it's still generating returns, still influencing policy, still shaping the world. The Morgans aren't as prominent publicly, but their legacy lives on through J.P. Morgan Chase. Jamie Dimon, the current CEO, runs a bank built on war profits. And the bank is still financing conflict. In 2003, before the Iraq War, J.P. Morgan Chase financed defense contractors who built the weapons used in the invasion. They made billions. And when Iraq needed reconstruction, J.P. Morgan was there to finance that too. Same playbook as World War I. Finance the war, finance the rebuilding, profit from both. And nobody talks about it, because we've been conditioned to see these banks as respectable institutions. They sponsor museums, fund universities, run charity foundations. Just like the opium families did, they use their wealth to buy respectability, to whitewash history, to make sure no one asks uncomfortable questions. But the questions need to be asked. Why are the same families that profited from funding the Nazis still controlling global finance? Why have they never been held accountable? Why are their banks bigger and more powerful than ever? And why is no one teaching this history? Go to any American high school. They'll teach you about World War I and World War II. They'll tell you about the battles, the leaders, the treaties. But they won't tell you about J.P. Morgan making $30 million in commissions. They won't tell you about Standard Oil selling fuel to Nazi Germany. They won't tell you about the Warburgs financing both sides. Why? Because the people who control education funding are connected to the same banking families. The foundations, the endowments, they all trace back to the same source: war profits. Yale has Rockefeller money. Harvard has Morgan money. Columbia, Princeton. All of them took money from families that funded wars. And those families made sure certain truths stayed out of textbooks. They fund the think tanks that shape policy. They fund the media companies that control narratives. They fund the politicians who write the laws. It's a closed system, and it's designed to protect itself. Here's the modern parallel. Look at what's happening right now in 2025. Conflicts in Eastern Europe, tensions in the Middle East, military build-ups in Asia. Who's profiting? Defense contractors. Who finances defense contractors? Wall Street banks. Who owns those banks? Investment firms. Who controls those firms? The same families. Different generation, same system. And it's all legal. That's the genius of it. They've structured the financial system so that profiting from war is just business as usual. War bonds are now called government securities. Arms dealing is now called defense contracting. Financing both sides is now called diversified investment portfolios. The language changed, but the reality didn't, and the scale is bigger than ever. The U.S. defense budget in 2025 is over $850 billion. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. And every dollar of that budget flows through the financial system, controlled by Wall Street banks. The banks take their cut, the defense contractors get paid, the shareholders profit, and the banking dynasties get richer. Meanwhile, American soldiers fight and die, just like they did in World War I and World War II, and the families that sent them there, the families that profited from their deaths, face no consequences. They get richer, they get more powerful, and they make sure you never connect the dots, but the dots are there. J.P. Morgan funded World War I, made a fortune, pushed America into the war to protect his investments. The Rockefellers sold oil to Nazi Germany, while American soldiers died fighting them. The Warburgs financed both sides of 2 world wars. The Rothschilds have been doing this for 200 years. These aren't conspiracy theories, these are documented facts. Congressional investigations proved it. The Nye Committee in 1936 investigated American banks and arms manufacturers. They found that financial interests pushed America into World War I. Senator Gerald Nye called them merchants of death. But nothing changed. The same merchants of death financed World War II, and they're still operating today. So what do we do with this information? First, we tell the truth. We stop pretending these banking families are respectable. We stop honoring institutions built on war profits. We acknowledge that J.P. Morgan Chase exists because J.P. Morgan funded World War I. We acknowledge that Rockefeller wealth came from selling oil to Nazis. Second, we demand accountability. These families still exist. Their wealth is still invested in defense, in oil, in the industries that profit from conflict. They should answer for what their ancestors did. Not with jail time, their generations removed, but with truth. Public acknowledgement. Reparations to the countries destroyed by the wars they funded. Third, we change the system. We break up the big banks. We regulate defense spending. We stop allowing private profit from public wars, because as long as war is profitable, there will always be people engineering conflicts, and those people will always be the ones who control the money. The banking dynasties got rich funding both world wars. Over 100 million people died. And the families made trillions. That's not ancient history. That's the foundation of the world we live in today. And until we confront it, it will keep happening. If this changed how you see who really runs the world, share this, because the truth needs to spread. The banking dynasties want you ignorant. They want you distracted. They want you to believe wars just happen. But they don't. Wars are engineered, and the engineers get rich every single time.